2022 was most definitely a year that redefined gaming for me. In combination with the industry finally bouncing back from lockdowns and supply shortages, the subpar releases from many of the bigger names in the industry pushed me to further explore my other options within the gaming realm. As a result, my love for gaming as a whole was immensely reshaped, and I gained a new appreciation for several genres I had enjoyed, but not fully adored in previous years. So brace yourself, viewers, for here's my brief overview of every new release I was able to play throughout 2022. Rainbow Six Siege has continued to serve as essentially the only online shooter I will still actively play and have an interest in. The team-based tactical shooter certainly adds a great layer of extra commitment and thought, even if you're just goofing around with friends. So with that in mind, I was pretty interested in Rainbow Six Siege Extraction. It's those same tactical elements now paired with executing alien enemies. Gosh, did that interest disappear quickly though upon release. Extraction offered nothing new in the Rainbow Six universe, simply inputting aliens into a more limited style of the Siege experience. Objectives and enemies don't vary almost at all, and without that variety, the game gets stale incredibly fast. Most people I know relegated to playing this game simply for the achievements a week into launch. I myself would get bored 2 missions in, as even tactically there was not much speciality to adapt in. To add injuries to insult, this game was renamed and delayed quite a few times due to the virus, and was initially planned to be a DLC for Rainbow Six Siege. Instead, in that fantastic Ubisoft fashion, it was released as a $40 standalone game. Though, with what we know about Ubisoft's financials and foreseeable future releases, this decision now makes sense. Elden Ring was perhaps the most hyped and talked about game of the year. Even with its release in February, it continued to dominate sales throughout the year, effectively boosting developer From Software's value by over 1100% year over year. Elden Ring is an action role-playing game played in a third-person perspective, with gameplay focusing on combat and exploration. It features elements similar to those found in other games developed by From Software, like Dark Souls and Bloodborne. It's set in an open world where players are allowed to freely explore the lands between, and its 6 main areas, with a fully customizable protagonist set on becoming the next Elden Lord. Dark Souls has never been a franchise I got into, but had watched enough of my friends playing to enjoy it. Thus, Elden Ring ended up serving as my proper introduction into the Souls-esque gaming, and quite frankly, I'm shocked I didn't take the dive sooner. The RPG elements are vast and immersive, swinging players into the online open world of Elden Ring quickly but effectively. The enemies are fascinating, and many offer enough of a challenge to keep the gameplay from becoming bland and repetitive. In addition, the lore was developed with the help of George R.R. Martin, most famous for his Game of Thrones novels. It really is no wonder that with all the elements it has, that Elden Ring garnered so much love from gamers of any and all kinds. A Memoir Blue was one of those interactive narratives that leaves a significant mark after just a single playthrough. The game follows our protagonist Miriam, a professional swimmer who revisits the memories of her childhood through surreal, dreamlike sequences. In addition to exploring the importance water has played throughout her life, this dive into Miriam's memories also serves as a way of her reapproaching the relationship with her mother. Players are exposed to a variety of interesting and intricate landscapes, from the lake to the city and everything in between. This game has been described as an interactive poem, and to be frank, there's really no better way to describe it. Even the title alone greatly alludes to the poetic influence. The mix of 2D and 3D art styles paired with a beautiful soundtrack create a somber atmosphere that's hard not to get completely absorbed into. Even then, while the gameplay is short, it certainly leaves its mark, eliciting an almost emotional response that very few other games can at this length. This was the first of many that, in my opinion, made 2022 the year of narrative gaming. Speaking of narrative games, Road 96 was one of 3 games that stole my heart throughout 2022. Taking place in a fictional southwestern country of Petria, you fill the shoes of several runaways who seek to escape the country's oppressive and often deadly Tyrek regime. The game was originally released in 2021 for Windows and the Nintendo Switch, but made its console debut in spring 2022. In a world where entertainment, including gaming, is becoming more unironically political, this was a game that, instead of taking a side, exposed you to the realities. Each secondary character had their place in the building of Tyrak's power and exposing them. Similarly, even his opponent, Flores, had her own agenda as well. As a wayward teenager, you can choose to take either of those sides or a third anti-government stance that helps shape the rest of the narrative and fate of each teenager you play as. The art style may seem simplistic, but it works for what the game is aiming to achieve. Furthermore, it helps keep the game at bay, as being overly realistic, as is the trend with much of AAA gaming, could strike a little too deep for players. Regardless of this, Road 96 hit me very deep. The art style and characters are supported by an absolutely beautiful score that remains as my favorite in gaming for 2022. As Dusk Falls was another narrative game in the bunch that was a bit of a quiet release. Set in the Arizona desert in 1998, this interactive narrative starts with the intersecting paths of 2 families brought together under the most stressful of situations. Of the characters, you alternate between playing as Jim and Zoe, the father and adolescent daughter of one family, and Jay, the teenage son of another, as they find themselves holed up in a dingy motel after a robbery turned hostage situation gone wrong. You come to learn more of the 3 as you play as them throughout 2 chapters, with each allowing you to choose dialogue and interact within scenes in ways that shape the outcome of the tale. You're able to further track the impact of those decisions in an interactive story map similar to those found in the Dark Pictures anthology game. Similarly to Dark Pictures as well was the ability to have co-op, where multiple players can shape the narrative. As Dusk Falls was incredibly memorable for its ability to explore the effects of trauma and desperation, with each being explored in a different way through each character. This deep exploration was well supported by a fantastic soundtrack and some really impressive voice acting. The art style is something many people took negatively, but its painting-like imagery ties in well for both the seriousness and sometimes dreamlike emotional deep dives. The ending was a little lackluster in my opinion, and certainly leaves the door open for a sequel should the developers choose to go that way. Regardless, this was another one of those great games that certainly left its mark. Okay, Boyfriend Dungeon did technically come out in 2021, but the highly anticipated DLC launched in August 2022, and it was the first time since Black Ops 2 that I willingly paid for DLC content. As a result, that's why this one gets an honorable mention on my roundup. Boyfriend Dungeon is a dating dungeon crawler simulator that was my first introduction to both genres, and I absolutely loved it. You play as a character who travels to the fictional Verona Beach for the summer in an effort to confront your fears and find romance. In this same world are people that can transform into weapons and those that are wielders. As a silent protagonist, you have the ability to wield, and coincidentally, all your potential love interests are weapons of varying kinds. The gameplay was fun, unique, and the dialogue was comedic and ironic enough that I had a hard time putting this one down. The Secret Weapons DLC adds 3 more weapons and 1 more dungeon level at Verona College. The humor remains consistent with the base game, and the characters you wielded there still make appearances in Secret Weapons. There's also the addition of a sci-fi nature that adds something even more unique to the world already there. Boyfriend Dungeon was one of 2 games that I absolutely adored in 2021, and rumor has it a sequel will be out in 2023. If you could combine the beat-based gameplay of Guitar Hero with the monsters and score of Doom, that's exactly what you get in Metal Hellsinger. Players fill the shoes of a character simply known as the Unknown, who travels through the underworld in order to find her stolen voice. Accompanied by a talking skull named Paz, players are faced with an onslaught of demons to a heavy metal score in which the best defense is one that goes with the beat. Players deal extra damage if their attacks are synchronized to the beat of the music, with additional instruments joining the song as the combo meters increase. This meter can also be maintained by performing other actions, such as dashing and reloading, also to the beat. And the beat also is represented in environmental elements such as fire animations, in what the game calls the natural rhythm of the universe. Metal Hellsinger attracted me simply for its obvious inspirations from the rebooted Doom franchise. It was surprisingly born of a cancelled project called Darkborn, which, upon playing, you wouldn't really expect. This game really excelled at taking something already well explored in gaming, the first-person shooter and combat, and making it their own with the music-infused fighting. Paired with a decent pair of headphones, you get sucked in by the wicked beats and soft lore that shapes this narrative pretty easily. Much like some other games in this list, it attempted innovation, and to a gamer like me that is tired of the hyper-visualized, movie-like single-player games, this was a refreshing and very welcome take. This is the second game tied with Road 96 that I would call my game of the year for 2022. I have no idea where to start with Scorn, but I will do my best to keep my love for this game at bay. You awaken the body of a decrepit man in a hellish landscape built of flesh, bone, and machines. Without any direction, you begin to wander, attempting to find a means to your existence. That's all I can really provide for the plot of Scorn without giving away the whole game. Inspired by the world of H.R. Giger, whose artwork also inspired the Alien franchise, Scorn is unlike any other game in which it serves as an immersion of your senses and an evocation of fear. The sound effects, which are composed of eerie soundscapes and the squelching of flesh, are something else in video games. To be honest, this game wins on its sound effects alone, as more times than I can count, I develop chills during the gameplay. The game also serves as one giant metaphor, which, depending on how you choose to take it, all lead back to the importance of the biological body, reproduction, survival, and mad science. Mixed in with the gameplay is some light gunplay and lots of puzzles. This game offers you no hand-holding either, with no map or HUD to guide you. A lot of people struck this one down without giving it a fair shot precisely for that aforementioned reason. As modern gamers, we have gotten overly dependent on the HUD of a game to carry us through, as opposed to the intuition that guided us 20 to 30 years ago. Everything about this game was amazing to me, and it is one I highly recommend if you've got a strong stomach and are ready for a challenge. A Plague Tale Requiem was at the top of my list for my most anticipated game of 2022. Following 2019's A Plague Tale Innocence, the sequel was a worthy follow-up that continued the story of Amicia and Hugo de Rune as they delved deeper into the origins of the plague rats in Middle Ages France. By comparison, the sequel incorporated far more action and less stealth in my opinion. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing, as the direction of the plot demanded putting both siblings in more fight-or-flight situations. The notable graphical improvement cannot just be obviously seen, but felt in the rendering of the rats. In fact, the improvement is so vast that there is an instance where developers were able to render 30,000 rats on screen in a handful of scenes. Requiem features more historical Easter eggs, with the names of characters and specific lore taken straight out of the history textbooks and adequately repurposed to create a well-developed world and continuing storyline. Amicia's character arc feels fully fleshed as well, with her not only becoming more mentally strong, but also struggling with the emotional scars left from the events of Innocence. While there is much debate over the ending, in my opinion, it was the only logical way to end the de Rune saga. I can appreciate that the developers chose substance over quantity, as like some other notable franchises, there was definitely an opportunity to milk this story further. A Plague Tale Requiem was a game that genuinely lived up to the hype, and that alone makes it a notable release for 2022. Signalis was one of those games I decided to try on a whim when I discovered that it had one of those rare 10 out of 10 ratings on Steam. Set in a dystopian sci-fi future in an unidentified planetary system that is governed by a totalitarian nation, you take the form of a replica, an AI that helps maintain and oversee the functions of the regime. Upon waking, you discover that something has caused the workers and AI to turn rogue, transforming them into ghoulish zombies. It's your job to discover the source of this infection and uncover what is really going on. The game is played from a top-down view with 2.5D animations, with gameplay very reminiscent of 80s and 90s gaming, for those of us old enough to remember that era. It incorporates horror elements from Silent Hill most notably, and that is felt strongly throughout each level of gameplay. Entwined with shooting your transformed peers is also a significant puzzle element and a world partially built through the discovery of notes and collectibles. Much like Scorn earlier on this list, even with a minimal HUD and map options, this game doesn't hold your hand, giving you the bare minimum on hints in order to progress. The controls are fluent and the puzzles are varied enough to keep you from sheer frustration with each attempt. The horror elements as well are near perfect in my opinion, and I rank Signalis as one of the best games I played this year for the horror alone. Call of Duty has not been a staple in my gaming repertoire for the better part of a decade. I was gifted a copy of the previous installment, Cold War, and aside from the obligatory campaign completion, I stayed away from it unless friends wanted to play the zombie mode. So when Modern Warfare 2 was revealed, I won't deny that there was an intense spark of excitement and nostalgia that eventually pushed me to purchase this game. Much like 2019's Modern Warfare, this was also a remake of the original that succeeded that previous game. The campaign was pretty typical, missing the sparkle the original had and instead catering to the graphics in order to sell it. The campaign missions were also incredibly short, something I've likened to a few friends as the ADHD of Call of Duty campaigns. That aside, the multiplayer is nothing particularly spectacular either. It has the same fast-paced online you'd expect of the last several entries and the most confusing and bloating user interface I have ever encountered in a game. It was developed by the same guy that made the user interface for Hulu, and it definitely shows. Finding attachments and calling cards are an unnecessary hassle, and gun progression also feels slow, as this game has been notable for over-capitalizing on skin packs. All that being said, it hasn't stopped me from hopping in when a group of friends are playing, as regardless of all the negatives, you still get some good laughs when queued up with the right folks. Evil West was another one of my most anticipated games for 2022. It looked like a blend between Red Dead Redemption 1's Undead Nightmare, Doom, and Devil May Cry, all set in the Wild West with vampires, and this checked quite a few boxes for me. Set right before the turn of the 20th century, you play as Jesse Rentier, an agent of the Rentier Institute who is tasked with hunting down and eliminating anything supernatural. The story starts with Jesse and a fellow hunter hunting down a vampire named Peter DeBano. DeBano seeks to start an all-out war with the humans in an attempt to subdue them before their monster hunting techniques develop to a point of no return for the vampire race. While you encounter and slay him pretty close to the beginning of the game, you come to learn that DeBano had an ace up his sleeve, Felicity, his daughter and the main antagonist for the rest of the game. Despite taking such amazing inspirations from games like Devil May Cry and God of War, the game felt very much like a copy and paste of several games all melded together in gameplay that felt very similar to a watered-down 2013's DMC reboot. I think the developers missed a bit of an opportunity here, as many of the final kills lacked variety, the monsters all had the same base design, the combat system was a little bit stocky, and there wasn't much of a streak system. Paired with this was a lack of depth to their world building, which was solely dependent on collectibles, which players had no incentive to really go and find. Despite all this, I definitely do have a bit of a soft spot for it simply because I'm a sucker for anything Wild West and vampire infused. Alongside Road 96 and Scorn, Pentiment is the third game I name as my game of the year. I have nothing but good memories playing this and was so enamored by it that a second playthrough is currently in my backlog. Pentiment is set in early 16th century Bavaria, where you play as Andreas Mahler, a traveling artist who has been recently commissioned by the region's baron to complete the artwork for an upcoming print in the small village of Tassing. Timed closely with his arrival is that of the said baron, Rothvogel, who has traveled far, eager to see how the commission is coming along. Unfortunately, his visit weaves more tensions than friendships, and he is soon found murdered in the church's chapter house. Andreas takes it upon himself to solve the Baron's murder in an effort to help calm the town and ensure proper justice is served. This is a very text-heavy narrative game, and as a result, it's definitely not everyone's cup of tea, as it is best described as a novelized game with subtle RPG elements. You're able to customize Mahler's background and have conversational options that help dictate the direction of the story. Paired with near-perfect character development, immensely accurate historical backgrounds, grounded thematic explorations, and deep storytelling, Pentiment is an absolutely beautiful game that garnered far too much hate upon release. If there is one game from 2022 that I would recommend everyone play, so long as they're okay with a lot of reading, it is most definitely Pentiment. Even though I've already released a full review of this game on my channel, I have to include it in the list because it is a 2022 release. Gungrave G.O.R.E was another one of those anticipated releases simply because back in high school I discovered the anime and adored it. Upon finding some old PlayStation 2 gameplay, I got sucked into the over-the-top world of Gungrave. Here we are 18 years later, and now we finally have Gungrave G.O.R.E, the third entry into the franchise. Following the infamous protagonist beyond the grave, or Grave for short, a mob hitman resurrected and now used for the forces of good, you fight your way through a fictionalized futuristic city in order to prevent the spread of an otherworldly drug called Seed. Featuring other characters of the known universe, the game was lackluster at best and got quite boring very quickly. Limited gameplay, uninspired combo moves, restricted exploration, repetitive missions, and a near invisible plot made this game a reminder of why it's sometimes best to leave some franchises in the past. This was a game you can visit if you're in the mood to turn off your brain to a seriously awesome score, but one that I would otherwise recommend skipping over. Dead Space is one of those franchises that is universally beloved by the horror gaming community. Minus the third one, we don't really talk about that. So when Glenn Schofield, the series creator, announced and revealed the Callisto Protocol, I broke my no pre-order streak to get this game, and boy do I regret it. The Callisto Protocol places players in the shoes of Jacob Lee, a freelance cargo ship operator whose Voyager unfortunately crashes on Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons and home to Black Iron Prison. Upon being found at the crash site, Lee is admitted as a prisoner, and after a rather brutal intake, he awakens to find the prisoner has been overrun with the ghoulish undead. With the help of a fellow prisoner, it's your mission to stay alive long enough to escape the undead moon. The best thing to say about this game is the visuals, and that's not really a good thing. The game is essentially an uninspired Dead Space sequel, with even less lore and barely there storytelling. Jacob Lee is a forgettable protagonist, and there is nothing that really drives you as the player to ensure his absolute survival. While some of the death animations were pretty cool, they served as an artificial deterrent to how empty this game actually felt. As a result, the Callisto Protocol ends up standing better as a representation of the current state of the gaming industry, which has come to favor style over substance in its latest releases. You can definitely expect a more fleshed out review of this one in the coming year, as the Callisto Protocol was iconic for the absolute worst reasons for me. Rick and Morty, but as a first-person galactic shooter, is pretty much what High on Life is. You take the role of a stereotypical loser who has no direction in life and plays non-stop video games. One day, upon planning for a house party with your sister in your parents' absence, your neighborhood becomes the landing site for an intergalactic gang called the G3 Cartel, who've come to Earth to harvest humans as drugs. Upon their arrival, you find a talking weapon called a Gatlian, who through his comedic verbiage guides you through what is happening and becomes one of several talking weapons that accompany you through the galaxy to take down the cartel. High on Life is hands down the underdog release of 2022. While the comedy may not be for everyone, I actually found it better than the Rick and Morty comedies simply because most of the humor was far more satire-based. The gunplay was polished, combos between weapons were fun, and each boss battle was genuinely entertaining and challenging. The game also varied consistency among the more difficult enemies in order to keep the gameplay engaging. Sprinkled across the galaxies you travel are fun Easter eggs as well, including one entire feature-length film called Demon Winds, which you can actually watch in its entirety in the in-game cinema. This game got a lot of hate upon release, and it certainly wasn't deserved, as it is quite frankly one of the better games of the year. So there you have it, a brief review of every 2022 release that I was able to get my hands on this past year. Let me know what some of your favorite or hated games of 2022 were down in the comments below. As well, if you enjoyed this video, please ever so gently tap that like button. If you're interested in keeping up with anything and everything gaming related, you can catch me over on Rumble every Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern for my This Week in Gaming podcast on The Lambency Show. Similarly, you can find episode re-uploads as well as browse some of my other reviews over at thelambencyshow.com. Thank you for stopping by, and I wish you all an absolutely wonderful 2023. Stay frosty, friends.